Thank you for watching the News Gang. The conversation continues. We started in East Africa. Gentlemen, just before the break, we were talking about how voices are coming up to talk about what has happened in Tanzania. And maswala ya maridhiano came up. We never thought we'd hear that from Samia Suluhu's government, but then it did come up. The new VP, Emmanuel Nchimbi, talking about how President Samia Suluhu wants reconciliation, but then the opposition Chadema had something to say about that. Let's listen to them.
Lakini ni dhamira ya Rais Samia Suluhu Hassan kuhakikisha kwamba tunaanzisha mazungumzo ya maridhiano ili kuhakikisha hata hao wachache wanapata nafasi ya kusikilizwa ili kuwa na taifa lenye amani na umoja na kuendelea kuwa mfano wa utulivu katika Afrika na dunia.
Kama tulivyokamatwa ndivyo tulivyoachiwa. Hakuna mazungumzo yoyote tuliyofanya na mtu yoyote. Nataka hili liwe very clear kwenye public, kwa sababu watu wasilete propaganda kwamba tumeachiwa kwa makubaliano fulani. Hatuna makubaliano tuliyoachiwa nayo. Bado sisi ni watu tunaamini ni innocent, na tunataka watu wengine wote wanaoshikiliwa kinyume cha utaratibu waachiwe waende kwenye familia zao.
That's the deputy party leader of Chadema, Heche. Remember, he was a gentleman who was coming to Kenya for the burial of the late Raila Amolo Odinga, akazuiwa pale kwenye border. He was arrested. He was released this week, and him and a few others were requested to report to police stations, I think, over a period of time. But he says no one has spoken to them about anything. JB, let me come to you. If you're having over 300 people facing treason charges, there are some who are facing treason and armed robbery. There are some who are facing armed robbery and arson, but most of them, actually the total number is 337, and some of them are facing more than one charge, but all of them are facing treason charges in places like Dar es Salaam, Dodoma, Iringa, Mwanza, and Kigoma. So where does reconciliation come in when you still have young people being charged with one of the most serious crimes that anyone can be charged with in a country, treason?
Precisely, the question that needs to be asked is, what does Samia Suluhu Hassan want them to reconcile about? Is she admitting that there were transgressions on her part, that she did not play by the book, and therefore people who are agitating to ensure that at least there's some semblance of a free, fair and transparent poll were right? Because for the person of the caliber of his deputy to come out and say this is what she wants, then it means there's something that they're admitting to. But I think I want to take it further and just look at what the bishop there was saying initially. Tanzania needs such and so many of such voices, and they must be louder, because the things that have been happening in Tanzania have gone on for far too long without the people who needs to speak remaining silent. And I think the events of October 29th, October 30th really must redefine the political culture of Tanzania going forward, because that is the only way that young Tanzanians, especially the huge numbers that are now in police custody, are waiting for these charges that I don't know whether they'll be justified or will be proved, are in there. Because when you have that huge number of people in police custody and you're talking about reconciliation, you need to only do two things. One is either release them or allow the judicial system to work independently so that they can have their day in court and see if these charges can be proved or not. But I think the most dangerous thing that we are seeing in the region, if I come back to what we were initially talking about, is what I'd call the Museveni template. I don't know whether leaders in the region are looking at it as something like a staying power for longevity in office, that they're all trying to act in the way in which Museveni has acted. Because if you look at all the what would be called democratic elections in Uganda, the process, the patterns are similar to what we are now witnessing in Tanzania and what we witnessed partly in Kenya last year and sometimes this year. Abductions, police killings and the likes. So, like some had indicated, East African community really needs to start reflecting and asking, is this what they want for the future generation of this community. Because if you instill in people a fear that if I cross into a territory that is not mine, but we are under federation kind of, then these are the kind of things that will happen to me without my country offering me that protection that it's supposed to do. So we are going to have a generation that is very scared, a generation that would be least creative, because they think if you speak up, then it's tantamount to treason. If you challenge authority, then you'll end up in a fridge. So we really need to have that discussion for the sake of the future of these nations. Because if we don't, then in about 10, 15 years, we'll have a generation that would not really want to step outside their comfort and would not want to challenge authority. Because if you do, then these are the consequences. So it's a bad trend. It's
a bad trend. And because, the thing is, we need to look forward to the future. What next?
Exactly.
We mentioned earlier that some of those in treason are social media personalities. One of them is Jennifer Jovin. She's known as Nifa. There's a video of her on TikTok that brought her a lot of problems. Maybe you can watch that video and continue with our discussion.
Ni watu wa hofu kwamba hakutakuwa na nywinywi wala nywinywi wala nywinywi hakutakuwa na nywinywi wala nywinywi. Rais Samia nywinywi wala nywinywi. Ni watu wa hofu kwamba hakutakuwa na nywinywi wala nywinywi.
Nifa is facing treason charges. She's also accused of encouraging protesters to buy gas masks in order to protect themselves from the police tear gas. The other content creators, there's Mika Chavala, there's Ruth Melda Sila, who is known as Strong Income, and there's a lady called Detha Obven. These are their TikTok names, social media names, and they're the ones who are facing these treason charges. I want to come to you, Sam, but before I do, Rob, I don't know if you can just play in the background the video of members of parliament being sworn in. Sam, I don't know, when I see them being sworn in, majority of them are CCM. Yeah. When I see them electing a speaker, when I see them electing the prime minister, the name of the person who has been recommended by the president, Nana Pitisha, because it's just a simple majority for him to be sworn in as prime minister. That happened too. It's like the members of parliament are moving on, like things are going on as normal. Despite everything else that Tanzania has witnessed, hundreds of people who are said to have been killed, some of them been buried in mass graves, families are looking for their loved ones. But then it's like wabunge wanaendelea tu kama kawaida, like things are moving on as normal. So where will Maridhiano come in when you have one part of the arms of government going on as normal?
What has been consistent in Tanzania the past few weeks is that they have been very keen to implement their constitution and their laws, because you recall that, as you said, at the time of the election being conducted on the 20th and 29th of October, and thereafter the results coming in, the constitution requiring that nobody can challenge an electoral outcome as announced by the Electoral Commission, INEC, and thereafter saying that as fast as possible the president has to be sworn in, and now seeing parliament being sworn in, they're implementing their constitution on the provisions that are there, because in any case the election has happened. There are voices that are very unhappy with what has happened, but then they have to go ahead and follow what the constitution says. At the same time, with all these treason charges, when you look at the law, it's also pretty fascinating, because the only mention of the word treason in the Kenyan constitution is when they are laying grounds of revocation of citizenship for a person who will have acquired it through registration. So you're not a Kenyan by birth, you come in here, but through certain procedures you become a Kenyan. Your citizenship can be revoked if you are guilty of treason or certain offenses that meet a particular threshold of penalty. But in the Tanzanian constitution, they actually are very explicit in establishing the offense and saying that the offense of treason would be the highest offense against the republic, which is the United Republic of Tanzania. Then, of course, it goes ahead to now narrate of what the offense is under the penal code, as you were saying earlier. But then as you look at all those things, to the extent of even if you witness treason and you don't report it or you don't provide information, that becomes an offense that you can actually be imprisoned for life. You can imagine how that means, because in the Kenyan setup, you cannot be forced to give testimony. And of course, Wakili can help us here on whether that can happen. You cannot be compelled if you don't want to give witness. But if you mislead, then there's an offense. I think it's, what do you call it? Perjury?
Perjury, yeah.
Yes. So you can see the two worlds, that Kenya and Tanzania are totally different when it comes to the setup in the constitution and the law. And therefore, even as you are looking at like that TikToker who is now facing particular charges because of her activism on social media, asking people to protect themselves, and that becomes an offense that you can actually be taken before court. My fear here is, given that they are really implementing the constitution and the law and the provisions that are in their laws, what will happen to these young people for whatever they have been involved in doing? Because if it is wrong to fail to report, if it is wrong to appear like you're supporting, what happens to the advocates in Tanzania if they are to go to court to defend the innocence of some of these Tanzanians? And in as much as the law and the regulations, the rules in the courts may allow lawyers to come and take part, what do you think they are thinking at night when they're preparing their notes that they are going to court tomorrow? You know, that mood, that tension, that spirit of intimidation is obviously not good for a country that calls itself democratic. One wonders what will happen to those people when eventually they face their day in court. Will they be treated like Tundu Lissu, who is actually facing treason charges, taken so long behind bars, taken so long for the hearing to begin? There has been several adjournments saying all manner of things, from the preparedness of the state on one hand, and on the other side talking about the preparations that the defense needs to put in place. So there's serious concern there. I think the ultimate solution, and it's difficult to advise a country because you can't, but the ultimate solution for the people of Tanzania would be for them to come together and realize they have a serious problem. Take lessons from what Kenya has gone through since 1963, with all the challenges, turning from multi-party state to a single-party country, eventually going back to multi-party democracy, going through the second liberation, as it were, and then eventually coming to the fruition of a new constitution in 2010. That journey that came after the post-election violence of 2007-2008, I think offers a lot of lessons for countries within the East African region, and of course also the Eastern Africa, because it's bigger than just the East African community. Failing to do so will be to cheat themselves, because the young people, with all the digital platforms that we have, the connectivity that is coming with it, the globalization of democracy, as you may want to call it, is a reality. So if they don't come together, take advantage of the moment they are in to reform their laws, their constitution, and their institutions, this will be such a missed opportunity that in the future, I don't know what they'll have to deal with when people feel safer and will express themselves more with a growing space that is on the digital platforms.
And you know, Sam, in that group of those people being charged with treason is actually a journalist from Milad Ayo. He's also facing treason charges. So before Linus, we come to you, I want us to listen to former Botswana President Ian Khama calling Suluhu an illegitimate president.
It is totally unacceptable when an African leader, in order to stay in power, will resort to killing his or her own people. In order to stay in power, will rig an election as if they are God's gift to their country. When you have a country with millions of people, for any leader to think they are the only ones who can be presidents is pathetic. And therefore, and my apology to those who may come from Tanzania, but I'm mentioning this because they are your neighbor, that the recent election and what transpired, the killings around that election, I, for one, do not recognize the person who was inaugurated as the president. She is an illegitimate president.
Linus, really, really strong words from former President Khama.
Yes, indeed, and from a person who speaks from a raised moral pedestal. Ian Khama is the 4th president of Botswana. Botswana got independence in 1980, and they have been a model of democracy. They started off with Ian's father, Sir Seretse Khama, who was the first president, and then his deputy, Ketumile Masire, became president, and then Festus Mogae was 3rd, and then Ian Khama came as the 4th president. I think they're now on their 6th, if I'm not
his candidate lost, remember?
And his candidate lost. So Botswana is a very good story on democracy to share. They don't shed blood. They shed political blood in terms of parties being defeated in elections. So when Ian speaks, he speaks because they have a good story to share. And he's basically saying one thing about, unfortunately, about President of Tanzania, that's Samia Suluhu Hassan, that she is now walking around with the mark of Cain on the forehead, basically because she spilled, or her government or her agents spilled a lot of blood for this transition to her elected term to happen. And we've seen the vice president talking about Maridhiano. And like Sam says, it's about going back to the reason they got here in the first place. And I think last time I illustrated a longer route that took them there. There's even a shorter route, a shorter one that started only in 2013. From 2013, there have been a lot of pressure from the political, or calls from the political opposition for reforms, constitutional reforms in Tanzania. You see, they have a constitution that dates back to 1977. And under this constitution, the constitution obviously was structured for a single party state where Chama cha Mapinduzi was the only ruling party. So Chadema and specifically Tundu Lissu have been asking very specific questions on election laws. First, reform the independent, the so-called independent electoral commission, make it really independent. And the way to make that independent is to walk away from the current route where the president actually nominates members of the Electoral Commission in Tanzania. And you remember this is what we did for a long time here with the Electoral Commission of Kenya. And before that, the elections were run by the provincial administration. So that is one of the things that the opposition wants the Tanzanian government, CCM, to accede to. The second thing is independent candidates are not allowed in Tanzania. You must have a party, so there's no independent, you can't run as an independent presidential candidate. They want that reviewed as well, allow candidates to run as independents for elections. They also talk about the introduction, that they need to introduce a 50+1 rule, which is what we have here. So like Sam says, we have the script. Kenya has been down this path, and I know, you know, nations and countries operate differently, but the one constant is no country can be able to turn back the clock. And something shifted in Tanzania on the 29th of October. It's not possible for Tanzania to be where it was before the election. They have to have another conversation. They have to talk about reforms. They have to talk about the life after 29th. And life after 29th is going to be substantially different from what it used to be. Look at the parliament we have there. It is a CCM parliament in a multi-party democracy. So there are very few opposition members. I think last time we counted, out of the 272 electoral seats, 270 belong to CCM. So are you a multi-party democracy at all? So some of these models are now being challenged by new generation of young people. And we're not trying to speak from a platform more raised than Tanzania's. We have the same challenges. Something shifted here too since the 25th of June last year. The youth are seeing the world completely in a completely different light compared to those people in government. So if you want to keep fighting, then that will only be detrimental to the greater good of the country. And that's what Tanzania is going to have to do. You have to face your demons. Kenyans faced their demons in the 90s. When President Daniel Arap Moi realized it's no longer possible to do this, he even overruled his own party, the Kenya African National Union, KANU party, and told them, no, it's okay. Let's get rid of Section 2A. So, and you know, he was a good political manager. In order to please the hardliners in the party, he said, not so that we allow multi-party, but so that we know who are the real KANU members. The best way to find out those who are loyal to the party KANU, then this is the time to go multi-party. As for the treason trials, isn't this again some a shared script around the region? This is what we've seen. We started here. I mean, we have some funny trials going on in Kahawa, arising from last year's
and this year
as well. And they are not sustainable. We are absolutely wasting time. Tanzania is charging that lady with dancing. I mean, there are people out there with worse dancing skills. I mean, for me, I have to admit, I think mine would be a hanging act if that is treason. Mine will be a hanging offense as well. And that is a problem that which I think is generational. Yeah. You have leaders who may not be fully in touch with where the youth are going, and they are the majority. Even by the common force of time, the youth will phase out the current generations, and they'll do things differently. Time will basically clear some of these old ways out of the way. But before you do that, like I said last time, if you don't change will get into your way.
And exactly that's what we're talking about. There's this fear that they have in the region about what these young people can do. And they're mobilizing. They're having the X spaces almost every evening with Tanzanians speaking, and they're on TikTok, and they're mobilizing, and they're speaking to each other. And I think it's a genuine concern that they need to have.
Here is the luck the region needs to count. From Museveni to our situation here in Kenya and to Tanzania. The current young generations are fighting for change in a different way. Mm-hmm. It's a battle of ideas. Mm-hmm. Here in Kenya, we saw them going to the streets with bottles of water, flags,
and their phones.
And their phones. The lady there being charged with treason, one of her offenses was to tell people and encourage them to wear face masks to protect themselves from tear gas canisters. What did the generation of President Yoweri Museveni do?
Went to the bush.
They went to the bush, took arms, and in fact, the story of NRM, the first team of I think about 20 or 26, they actually raided a police station and stole arms, and the rebellion began. And as they jail or take people to the fridge in Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni as a rebel was actually many times operating from Kenya. He would be here and will be given a safe passage. To Uganda's credit as well, the people that were fighting for multipartyism in the 90s, including the late Raila Odinga, were actually given safe passage through Uganda. Because these are causes that are greater than self. Even Museveni is battled, and I think that's the reason that he was never really in trouble here in Kenya. Though he was running a rebellion, and even when peace talks failed in 1985 here at the KICC, he was still given safe passage back home. So here is the luck that we should not be missed, that the current generations have decided not to carry arms. What if they did?
Wow.
Yeah.
I just wonder,
yes,
had the internet not been shut down, how many people would be facing treason today?
In
Tanzania?
Yeah.
Because they would have had the opportunity to publish.
Yep.
All this is bad, because you can imagine what it does to the national psyche of the people of Tanzania. You can't express yourself. How do you build a country if you can't express yourself? That you have to do whatever you have to do in fear. You've seen, even in political parties, even in Kenya, where people cannot express themselves because they fear of receiving certain calls from certain quarters. So can you imagine if that was the national approach to management of public affairs? I think the point here is this is all bad.
Yeah.
And the other day we saw the president in an interview with Al Jazeera talking about why a person cannot score way into the 90s in an election if that were to be in Kenya. Of course, he was very cautious and not to really meddle into the affairs of Tanzania. You'd expect him, obviously, to respect the sovereignty of a country. But when he now deployed that return from an election in the Kenyan context, you heard him saying how that would not happen. And for sure it cannot, for the simple reason that there are varying opinions. The political parties, though they are not perfect, the democracy in the political parties is not perfect in Kenya, but at least there's that space that people can express themselves, people can actually go to an election, campaign freely. Sometimes, of course, even with the by-elections that are going on, the campaigns that are going on in different parts of the country, you've seen there is violence being instigated by different quarters. Imagine if that was by the state, the Kenyan context.
As we go to the Kenyan context,
just a quick correction.
Yes,
did I say 1980?
Yes, you said.
Seretse Khama died in 1980. Oh. The independence of Botswana was 1966. Oh. That is when they got their independence. And Seretse Khama was called. I just mixed that up.
Father to Ian
Khama died in 1980. Yeah.
Thanks, okay. We were going to discuss Kenyan politics, but maybe we don't have much time, but we need to touch on this. I just want us to listen to President Ruto akisema kuna watu wanagawa serikali ya Kenya, and then let's listen to his former deputy talking about wanaume watano wanapanga kuelekea nyumbani.
Ati sasa kuna wanaume tano ati wameketi chini ati wanagawa serikali ya Kenya. Ati wewe chukua 50%, wewe chukua 20%, wewe chukua 10%. Mimi nataka niwaambie hawa jamaa, my friends, serikali ya Kenya si yenu. Serikali ya Kenya ni ya wananchi hawa wote. Si nyinyi ni mtapiga kura. Si nyinyi ndio mko na akili. Wale watu wanatuadaa bwana. Tutawaonyesha kivumbi asubuhi na mapema.
Hao wanaume watano wanakutana na mama moja. Hakuna serikali wanagawa. Wanapanga vile utaenda nyumbani. Hiyo ndio kazi iko mbele. Na hakuna mtu nagawa serikali. Tumeambiwa na watu ya Kenya, kazi yetu ya kwanza ni kupeleka Kasongo nyumbani. Mambo ya serikali tutaongea baadaye.
You know, we have the by-elections on 27th, and then you have the elections in 2027, and we're already having all this happening, campaigns. The president has been busy talking about how these guys have no plan, and the opposition saying for them they just want to get him out. For how long will this go on, JB?
Jamila, you do know better. Waswahili husema safari ya kesho upangwa leo. And true to that, I'm a firm believer that the contest for 2027 started taking shape as soon as President William Ruto was sworn in. And it's getting into a period where formations are taking shape and everybody's testing waters, everybody's trying to find out what exactly do I need to do to achieve the ultimate goal, which is the presidency. Like we said here about a week ago, just as soon as Raila Odinga was buried, that the tempo will rise up to until August of 2027. We are in campaigns full mode, and I don't see anybody retreating, because that is how our politics is designed. You win an election, you are done with an election, you start campaigning for the next election.
Sam, ODM is celebrating 20 years.
Yes, a very important milestone. And you recall that before Raila Odinga traveled to India for his medical attention, he had rallied the supporters of the party and members of the party to meet in Mombasa for the ODM at 20. And you recall how spirited that was. It was actually supposed to happen in the month of October, but had to be postponed for different reasons. And I would presume that one of them was that he needed to travel to India for the treatment. So yes, this is also an opportunity. We've seen that the National Governing Council of the ODM has ratified the leadership of Dr. Oburu Oginga as the party leader, now succeeding his brother, the late Raila Odinga. So let's wait and see what the conversations in Mombasa are going to yield. But as we do so, you recall that not long ago, I think it was last week or the week before, where Dr. Oburu Oginga was saying that going into 2027, they're not going for anything short of the deputy president seat. I'm just wondering, for the president to say, wale wanagawa serikali, what is that statement from ODM? Because every other party, and you've heard from different leaders, including ODM party members, saying that every political party is formed so they can capture power, or political power. So what are they supposed to be doing if it's not to strategize on how they're going to win it in 2027? But I think of importance is that the people must not forget that politicians are politicians. They must do their politics, but at the same time, people must continue to run their businesses, to manage their families, to manage their little wealth that they have, because at the end of the day, while politics is important, it also depends on what you do within your space as a Kenyan. That's
a really good note to end it at. Sam, JP, and Linus. We'll keep this conversation going. The by-elections are in 2 weeks. I'm sure there'll be a lot happening between now and then. It's now time for our final words, and we'll start with my memo.